Hello, MCU fans. Today is going to be my What If Season 2 breakdown, all 9 episodes, in fact. Now, I loved the 9 days, 9 episode release schedule, but admittedly, I really like to do deeper breakdowns, and it was very hard to do that with them coming out on a daily basis. So I waited to the end to look at all of them together, and then this will be our breakdown. And in particular, I'm going to look at 2 things: the timeline ramifications, meaning when did each episode branch off the sacred timeline, and do we learn anything in that episode that happened prior to the branch? Because anything prior to the branch, that's new lore about the sacred timeline. Very cool. Also, we'll be discussing any multiversal reveals, and oh my, there were some big ones. Cannot wait to talk about those. So keep in mind there will be spoilers for everything in What If Season 2 and even a little bit of What If Season 1, but as long as you're okay with that, let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we do have the December contest running all month long, which is basically today, ending today. And all you have to do to enter is be a subscriber, leave a comment, and one random winner will be announced in early January and can choose from one of the books or steel books above. Best of luck. And don't forget, we have the membership option in case you want to support the channel in that fashion. But really, anything you do to support is greatly appreciated. Just simply subscribing, liking videos, leaving comments, etc. goes a long way. Okay, so a couple things to keep in mind as we do this breakdown. The timeline book showed us this image, which I realize you can't read the words. It's not so much about them and more about just what you're seeing here, which is we have a sacred timeline, and each episode from season 1 branched off on a certain year. So, for example, 965 or 2015, 2016, 2018, etc. But that means anything in those episodes that give us information that happened prior to the branch, that is sacred timeline. So we're going to see how some of these episodes have some really cool facts. And as a good example of how this works, even in the timeline book, they said that anything that happened when during Endgame, they went back in the time heist, like to the 70s in this case, anything we learned, well, that's sacred timeline stuff. So Howard Stark, Dr. Hank Pym working on his Ant-Man costume, Peggy Carter being the director, etc. So really, really cool. All right, the other thing to keep in mind is we do have this working model of the MCU multiverse, and I'm trying my best. I'll take feedback from anybody. In fact, we've had a lot of discussions recently on the Discord server about it, but this is how I think the multiverse is laid out, with different alternate universes, each with their own Infinity Stones, creating paint and cartoon, animated, 838, and 616. And I think What If is focused specifically on 616 and its branches. So we're going to see whether this season of What If fits in this multiversal model. Now, I have done other videos you can check out that go into a lot more detail on this model, but this is enough for this particular video. All right, so let's jump right into Season 2, Episode 1. Now, the branch point seems to be sometime in 2014, because we know that Ronan the Accuser betrayed Thanos. I don't know if they make it crystal clear whether we already had the Power Stone or not, but the reason that's important is on Xandar, we do see some familiar faces who maybe shouldn't have been there if Ronan had not yet found the Power Stone, in particular Drax. I mean, Drax was in prison, remember, until that prison break, and then after that is when Ronan found the Power Stone. So I wish they'd been a little more clear on that, but Groot being there, that's fine. It's strange that Rocket wasn't, but that's fine. More interesting is good old Korg and Meek, because that means in 2014, they weren't yet on Sakaar. That is going to get more interesting when we get into a later episode, so kind of keep this in mind right now, that at least in 2014, they had not yet gone to Sakaar. We also have Howard the Duck. He was interesting because he was, of course, in the Collector's Cage until Ronan came and took the Power Stone and everything got destroyed. So presumably it is after Ronan got that Power Stone. I do love that Howard showed up and was running a casino. And of course, we knew from Guardians 2 that he eventually went to Contraxia. Well, not in this case, because they locked it up tight and nobody could leave for 5 years. So this cameo did not happen in this branched universe. I do love that we got the Nova Corps charter. So basically, the oath said, seek the light, be the light, never stray from its path. So that tells us that Nova, if he ever shows up, please Marvel, give us Nova, will be a morally unwavering character because he took this oath, never stray from the path. He might be more straight-laced than even Captain America. So very interesting. We also learned that Xandar did have this protective case, this impenetrable shield that they could put around the planet. They didn't use it in Guardians, but probably they didn't have time. But still, interesting to know they had that as an option. I'm kind of curious about this. Let me know in the comments. Do you think it's part of the sacred timeline that Yondu and Nebula actually knew each other? Notice Nebula says Yondu and I had a past and some memories to go with it. And even Yondu calls her Nebi and says we make quite a team. Now, I'm wondering if maybe this relationship was formed during the 5 years in this episode, that the shield was up. But let me know what you think. Do we now know in the sacred timeline that they had met each other prior to Guardians #1? I think the biggest reveal, though, is that Jan-Rog is alive after the Captain Marvel movie. You kind of wondered if Captain Marvel, when she went back to destroy the Supreme Intelligence, which of course we learned in the Marvels movie, did she take down Jan-Rog? Apparently not, because in 2014 he was still up and running, and we do learn that he knew his way around Xandarian security, which makes sense because even though the Kree really hate the Skrulls, they didn't like Xandar either. So it makes sense that he would have been lurking around, and of course that's how he got arrested. We learned that Nebula arrested him for that very reason. So I wonder if we'll see Jan-Rog again. Let me know what you think. Was this just a one-off, or is he still out there, and may he return? Okay, so that's pretty much it for season 1 or episode 1. Episode 2 gets very interesting from a timeline standpoint. Okay, so the branch point really seems to be 1988, right? They tell us New York, 1988. They also tell us 6 months earlier from this point, that's when Yondu came, got Peter Quill, and actually gave him to Ego instead of not doing it like in the sacred timeline. And they even give us a date, because in the episode, during the 6 months later time frame, we get a date of 6/12/88 on one of the computer monitors when they're seeing everybody, landing on the planet. Okay, well, 6 months before that would be 1987, right? Because if present day in the episode is June of 88, then that's like December of 87. Well, there's a problem, because in Guardians 2, we learn that in 1980 that Meredith Quill was pregnant. Not yet Star-Lord being born, but she was pregnant. In fact, she wasn't really even very pregnant, to be honest. Then we learn in 1988, of course, he's taken away by Yondu, and we learn in Guardians 3 that he was 8 when that happened. You can do that math, but that means basically Yondu got him at the end of 1988. But in this episode, it was the end of 1987. So what does all this mean when it seems like they're not quite getting the continuity right? Are they rewriting the logic of the sacred timeline? No, I think what's probably happening is the episode could have been entitled, "What if Yondu showed up a year earlier?" Right? I mean, it just means the branch happened earlier in the timeline. And the watcher is focusing more on the event that's the most important thing in the episode. But still, I'm a timeline guy. I had to point out that this doesn't quite match. But again, the branch just formed earlier. All right, that's fine. Another issue, minor, but is that Hank had not yet quit. I mean, here we are in 1988, and Hank he's saying to Hope, "Hey, I used to work here, sweetie, not anymore." Well, in the beginning of Ant-Man, the flashback is in 1989 when he quits. Okay, that's fine. Once again, it just simply means that he quit earlier in this branch. But I'm just kind of pointing out these timeline things because you know that if I was helping write these episodes, I would be really, really on this stuff. But I think they want certain things to be able to happen in the episode. And so, they change things around a little bit to make everything fit. That's fine. Branch just happens earlier. All right, what are some of the things we learned, though, that are pretty cool? I like seeing Peggy and Howard looking over Project Pegasus. That was cool because we don't see too much of it. We just see really Marvel working there, and of course Carol, but we don't see Howard and Peggy, so that's pretty cool. I also love seeing Bill Foster's costume. That was sweet. Very, very cool. I hope we do more episodes in the past and we get to see more of him as Goliath. Also, what a cool reveal of where they got the vibranium to make Captain America's shield. In comes King T'Chaka, obviously, and they mention your father was a great ally to us during the war. And yes, I understand he even donated some vibranium to your efforts, to which they say, yeah, we made a shield out of it and we lost it in the Arctic. But that's a cool reveal. And I kind of wonder if they're hinting at some of these past things from Wakanda, because as probably everybody knows, next year we're going to get a Wakanda history series going back into these earlier years. So maybe we'll even see the vibranium being given to S.H.I.E.L.D. So very cool. Very cool. Now, I thought this was interesting. Peggy and Howard recognize that the Winter Soldier is Bucky, because in he comes walking, and notice they say, it looks just like him, Howard, just like Bucky. So that makes me wonder, in the sacred timeline, does that mean that S.H.I.E.L.D. was aware that the Winter Soldier might be Bucky, and they just simply didn't tell Cap? That's so interesting because keep in mind, later we find out that in the Hydra Stomper episode, they didn't tell Peggy that it was Cap in there. So yeah, S.H.I.E.L.D. is good at keeping secrets, right? But this kind of implies S.H.I.E.L.D. knew that that might well be Bucky. Wild. Makes you rethink Winter Soldier, huh? Also, it's kind of cool to see Wendy Lawson, more importantly, Marvell, showing up. And basically, she says, hey, I'm Kree Force. So I thought that was kind of wild. It's like, wasn't that supposed to be a secret? But anyway, very cool. We also learned that Bill Foster, at least in this universe, grew to more than 21 feet. Because one of the jokes in the Ant-Man and the Wasp movie was he maxed out at 21 feet. But here he says, no, I made some adjustments. I figured it's the end of the world. So I don't think they're rewriting canon. In Sacred Timeline. He only went to 21 feet. But clearly, in this universe, to prepare for this world-ending threat, he got taller. I really like this, though. So while they're trying to stop Peter, they throw away this really important comment here where he says, you'd think the leader of a technological superpower that masquerades as a third world country would appreciate that. Of course, they're referring to King T'Chaka not being a third world country, right? So basically the big reveal is S.H.I.E.L.D. has known for a long time that Wakanda is not a third world country and just never revealed it. That's wild. In fact, that might explain why Nick Fury had Wakanda on one of the computer monitors in Iron Man 2. So very interesting. All right. So we also learned that this cage, which of course they used to trap Loki in Avengers, has actually been around for a while. You know, because we're all by the way back in 1988, and they already had this thing built. So that's just kind of interesting. And then I think this is really cool. So we get this little bit of lore that there's an ancient Wakandan proverb from the days before our tribes united. Only one wins in a two-front war by getting out of your enemy's way. So you basically get out of your enemy's way if you're in a two-front war. But here's the key. This again is hints that we're going to learn some of these really cool Wakandan lore. Because he says, ancient Wakandan proverb from the days before our tribes united. So I think this is their way of getting us excited about learning some of the history of Wakanda, including proverbs like this. But more importantly, we may learn prior to the tribes uniting. And I would love that history. That would be so cool. All right, so episode 3. This one is really hard to tell the reason for the branch. I think when it happens is December of 2014, because it's after Hammer gets out of jail, and we know he was in jail during All Hail the King one-shot with Trevor. Remember that? That's in the beginning of 2014. And we know that the Iron Legion bots are still around in this episode, so it's prior to Age of Ultron. So December of 2014 works great. But all the Watcher tells us is, perhaps in this universe, Justin Hammer had a little too much time. So he was in prison too long? I don't know. It's just interesting that they didn't really explain what the branch was, other than it's Justin Hammer wants to take over the Avengers Tower, which I'm all for it, because you know I love me some Justin Hammer. A couple of other interesting Sacred Timeline things we learn. When Happy says, Darcy, you want to get college credit for this? Listen to me. So she's still in college at this point in 2014, which makes sense because we learn in WandaVision she had a doctorate. So she probably was in college for a long time. This is interesting. So Maria Hill in this universe is the director. So that shows there must have been something different about this universe after the fall of S.H.I.E.L.D. in Winter Soldier. Because, Fury's not director anymore, but S.H.I.E.L.D. still exists. And Hill is director. I thought that was a cool way to bring her back. But wow, I want to know more about this. Well, how did this happen? Then also, this is a question about the Sacred Timeline. Does this mean in the Sacred Timeline that Tony had been messing around with Banner's blood, seeing if he can help the Hulk without the anger management issues? In other words, did this blood right here that we see in the episode, is that still somewhere? Or maybe it got destroyed when Avengers Tower got wrecked? I don't know. I kind of feel like this is something unique to this universe, but I also think it's getting us prepared for the fact that we're going to be seeing Thunderbolt Ross turn into Red Hulk due to the blood. In fact, even in this episode, is this a tease right here for Captain America 4, showing us how it may go down when Happy Hogan becomes this beast, this fiend, if you will. All right, so this is interesting. Did Hawkeye tell everybody he's a dad in this universe? Notice he says the wife says, bring home this toy or don't come home at all. But it wasn't until Age of Ultron where they learned that he was a dad. So he seems to be not so much caring about everybody knowing he's a dad in this universe. I do love this joke, though. I love that all of the Iron Mans are sold out other than that one, and there's a ton of Hawkeyes on the shelf, marked down multiple times, down to 25%. Poor Hawkeye. Poor Hawkeye. All right, this is interesting. how long in the past did Tony create Edith? They talk about Edith 1.0. That's kind of cool. And then, of course, was this just done to remind us of how much we love Justin Hammer? I'm Santa Claus, baby. Seeing him in that armor was just so incredible. But I think we're going to see Justin Hammer coming back in Armor Wars, so it makes sense that they would bring him back and kind of just remind us of how much fun he was. So I can't wait for Armor Wars. I can't wait. And then this is interesting. Notice that he refers to him, Justin Hammer refers to him as the Freak. So I think this is tying back to very, very early Iron Man comics from the 60s. And supposedly, one of the reasons that Jon Favreau was willing to do his voice in season 1 is he said in season 2, I want to be the Freak. So this was legit his idea to turn into this monstrous thing. I love it. So they name drop Freak here so that we know exactly what he's called. And he appeared actually in a couple different issues. So pretty crazy. And then, in case you missed it, go check it out. There is a funny audio Easter egg at the end where Darcy sings a little song. And you know what's funny? Make up dumb songs for money. That is not in the episode. She doesn't say that. That was only in the closed credits. So not only listen to it, but turn on the closed credits because they have a little extra funny Easter egg there. All right. How about episode 4? This one was crystal clear when the branch happened. It works perfectly. It was May of 2012, the attack on New York, right? And in this universe, Tony never made it, and he ends up on Sakaar. And then I think a lot of people already knew this, but this episode was supposed to air in the first season. I think it just wasn't completed in time. But either way, we're finally getting it now. This is interesting. The Grandmaster knew what happened on Earth. So you kind of think of him as this kind of flaky dude running Sakaar and doesn't really care about anything else going on in the universe. Oh, no. We learned that he knew about the crusher of the Shatarinos. Shatarinos. He says it much better, obviously. Anyway, that's cool that he's really paying attention. In fact, he knew about Thanos. You offspring of Thanos, he says to Gamora, his little muppet of evil. We're all huge fans of your father's work. So he knew what Thanos was doing. Fascinating. So yeah, he may come off as pretty clueless, but I think he knows a lot more than he lets on. Then this was kind of cool to see that maybe before the fights that we saw obviously in Ragnarok, they had a Grand Prix. Perfect for Tony, obviously, but also neat to see that they had different types of contests. Then, okay, here's the issue. So Valkyrie being on Sakaar totally makes sense. Korg, interesting, right? This means he was on Sakaar by 2012. Yet, in that earlier episode, he was still on Xandar in 2014. So, I don't know. Again, the way I look at all this is the branch just happened earlier because they're not rewriting the sacred timeline. They're not saying, Korg was in 2 places at once or whatever. It just means that in that the Nebula episode, he was there was a branch earlier in time, and he was on Earth longer, I guess. But anyway, pretty funny. And the funny thing is, we probably wouldn't have even noticed this if they hadn't delayed this episode to this season. It made it all the more obvious that Korg was in 2 different places at 2 different times. But anyway, we also learned that the Elders of the Universe are very hard to kill. Very hard to kill. I mean, I know this was done as a joke where he gets, disintegrated and still is a puddle. But I think the real key is maybe that you can't kill him, right? I'd love a little more lore around them. The Collector, and that's maybe why the Collector's still alive, because he's supposedly an Elder of the Universe. So anyway, very interesting. All right, and speaking of killing, Gamora takes out Thanos, or they kind of leave us wondering, right? That pans away before we see him dead. But if you go back to the first season and in the last episode, we see them melting his Infinity Gauntlet. And then even the Watcher says, Gamora, survivor of Sakaar and destroyer of Thanos. So yeah, the funny thing is Thanos dies this season about as many times as Tony Stark died in the first season. In fact, I don't think Tony Stark dies at all this season. And Thanos gets killed multiple times. Hey, he died first season too, but he died a ton of times this season. So pretty funny. Okay, now we get to the Captain Carter episode, but I'm going to jump back really briefly to season 1, episode 1, because following her chronology was a little trickier than it seemed at first. So this is interesting. If we go back to season 1, remember it seems like the branch point is June of 1943, because that is when Steve Rogers underwent the experiment. And as the Watcher says, in this universe, a single choice created a whole new hero. So he's saying this is the point of the branch. Then, in the same episode, they go out and try to catch the Red Skull, who has just retrieved the Tesseract. And that's important. Just retrieved it in 1943. Other than the fact that in the sacred timeline, he retrieved the Tesseract in 1942. So, again, this episode really should be named What If the Red Skull Found the Tesseract Sooner? Or sorry, later. What if the Red Skull was really bad at his job? That's really the name of the episode because it took him a year longer to find it. So anyway, just kind of funny. Don't worry about it. They're not rewriting the timeline. The branches are happening at different times, clearly. But more importantly is Peggy gets pulled into the portal, as you remember at the end of the episode. That brings her to 2012, where she's looking for Steve Rogers, and of course, he's nowhere to be found. Then we pick up in season 2, episode 5, when they show us the story of the Avengers battle. So basically, right after the end of season 1, here we end up with this battle. But here's what's key. Look at the Wasp. Isn't that wild? It's a quick shot, but if you pause it, you can see the Wasp in there instead of the Hulk. So I thought this was pretty cool. AC Bradley took to Twitter to fill the gap for us. So she says, since a few people have asked, yes, that is Hope in the Battle of New York. How did it happen? Spoilers ahead. So she says, since Captain Carter, a woman, ended World War II, the feminist movement occurred immediately after the war. This had a ripple effect across society, leading to more female SHIELD agents, heroes, and women in positions of authority. And then this is cool. She says, check out the strike team at minute 12. So here we go. And look at that. I didn't even notice it. There's women on the left, a lady on the left, and a lady on the right. Yeah, very cool. All right, so then she says, since Peggy Carter wasn't around to found SHIELD, that responsibility fell to Hope's parents, Hank and Janet, and also Bucky, and a good friend, Howard Stark. This all led to Hope taking on the Wasp mantle earlier. I love that she's thought all this through. And then finally she says other tidbits. Bucky survived the war and became a Jimmy Carter-esque elder statesman. Howard didn't die till 1991. In my mind, Howard was a better father and had a closer relationship with his son. I love AC Bradley. So cool. So cool. Did a great job with both seasons of What If. All right. So then after that Avengers battle and all that little bit of history there, we then pick up right before the Winter Soldier scene, or heading to the Lemurian Star. And this time, though, it's Widow who's out jogging, and it's Peggy Carter in the car. So that's kind of a cool little reversal. Then they head to the Lemurian Star, and this, now we go back to season 1, episode 9, where they're heading towards the Lemurian Star, which is when the Watcher shows up and says, you've been chosen. So she goes on that adventure. Then we get the post-credit scene in season 1, episode 9 with the Hydra Stomper. Now, this is one of the weirdest transitions, though, into season 2. Did you notice this? So, the Black Widow says, yeah, and there's someone inside. And she says it, excited, like, hey, you're going to be really glad to see who's inside. Well, no, because immediately the Hydra Stomper turns on and activates. Now, you could play it off as, oh, well, Widow just didn't know. No, she's not going to get a pass for this. So, after the war, says Nick Fury, Rogers and Barnes formed their own two-man army and destroyed every Hydra base on Earth until the last mission claimed Steve's life. Then, Black Widow drops the bomb. Peg, the Steve Rogers you loved, died in 1953. Didn't see the point in breaking your heart twice. Didn't see the point. You just set her up to be all excited by going, look who's inside. What? Widow? Come on. I mean, I realize Widow compartmentalizes a lot, but if I were Peggy, I would be really mad. Like, why did you tease me if you're going to turn around and tell me this? So I do have to wonder if they didn't change their plans a bit for season 2, but in universe, I guess Black Widow just wasn't thinking. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. All right, so I do love this double Easter egg. We get one of the dudes from the Security Council being revoiced by the original actor. Way cool. And then a name drop of Sokovia needing an aid package. So that's really cool that the elder statesman Bucky is wanting to take care of him. Love that. Then, once again, another universe where Barton reveals he's a dad way before in the Sacred Timeline. Because notice she says, Barton introduced me to Dad Rock. Like, does everybody in every universe know that he was a dad other than the Sacred Timeline? Cracks me up. Anyway, I love the fact the Watcher gets surprised. This, of course, is when Wanda pops in. And boy, we're going to talk more about Wanda. But anyway, Wanda pops in and he says, what the hell is this? And of course, it's Wanda porting away Captain Carter. And even the Watcher doesn't know where they went, at least not at first. I'm sure he figured it out eventually, but didn't know it at first. And yes, there will be a little more discussion coming about Wanda, but we'll hold off for now. The key is, in this episode, it ended with them saying, basically, she's going to save our world. All right, and I do love this, that Peggy calls out to the Watcher. Watcher, Watcher. She's all ticked. I mean, they are best buds now. I mean, literally, they're on first name basis, I guess. Well, she doesn't know he's a Watu, does she? Okay. He knows she's Peggy. He calls her, or she calls him a Watcher. It all works. It all works. All right. Then this is interesting too. We see the Watcher literally repairing his realm. It's earlier in the episode, but I just saved it to mention till now. But remember, it got broken into by Ultron. So Ultron cracked it. So I just want to know more about this thing. I mean, it's probably the nexus of all realities. I understand the name and I understand the concept, but I just want to know more of the lore. Like, who created it? When did this get created? Who assigned the Watcher to watch this? So much I want to know. Marvel, tell us. This is so cool. But anyway, so he fixes it up, and that's great. All right, so then we move to Season 2, Episode 6. Now, this one seems to have a branch point around circa 1000. Because in this case, and this is the Kahori episode, in this case, Odin was not able to hide the Tesseract on Earth, and instead Ragnarok came and Surtur appears and destroys it, and of course the Tesseract lands on Earth and ends up giving Kahori and her ancestors powers. But when did Odin hide the Tesseract in Norway? That's the real question, right? Because that's the branch point. So I had to look this up myself. I thought I knew the timeline like the back of my hand. But so there's the Battle of Tonsberg in Norway, which eventually goes up to the Jotunheim as well, and that's where he finds Loki eventually, right? So in the timeline book, this happens. Then Wenwu, which we're probably now talking around 1000 CE. They don't give the exact date, but we know that he had the rings for 1,000 years. So yeah, 1000, somewhere in there. Then is when he hides the Tesseract on Earth. Again, they don't give us a date, but it's going to be sometime after 1000 CE. And that makes sense because the Watcher does say the Tesseract took on a second life among Kahori's ancestors. So it seems like it's been there long enough that several ancestors and the elders, if you will, have learned about it and said, stay away from it, it's dangerous. Also, keep in mind that Queen Isabella, who does appear in the episode, reigned from 1474 to 1504. So the current episode is around that time frame. But I bet that the branch would be sometime before he buried the stone, or in Tonsberg, because that didn't happen, but after Wenwu found the rings. Okay, there we go. So somewhere in there, I'm going to say around 1000 CE. Okay, the episode gives us a new realm, the Sky World. Very cool. And the Mohawk tribe, and the Mohawk Nation, this is something they believe in. This is their afterlife. So did they just create a brand new afterlife in this episode? That's pretty cool, if so. I love it. Also, not only do we get a new afterlife, but we also get a new hero, Kahori. So very cool. Can't wait to see if she shows up in live action, maybe in Secret Wars. Very interesting character, very cool. I loved how the episode was all in native tongue. In fact, at the end, they give us this really nice thank you to the Mohawk Nation who collaborated directly with the episode. I know it was a big deal for them, and it was just a cool cultural thing to have happen. So I really enjoyed it. And of course, we get Stephen Strange pulling a Wanda, showing up in a different universe, and pulling Kahori over. So we're definitely going to talk more about this. But yeah, very interesting. Okay. Season 2, Episode 7. This one's branch point is even more confusing. So it sounds easy, right? It's basically that Odin, instead of imprisoning Hela in hell, notice with 2 L's. I thought that was interesting. In the close credits there, or closed captioning, it's 2 L's. Should only be 1. But anyway, instead of imprisoning her in hell, of course, he strips her of her headdress and sends her down to Earth. So when did that happen in the sacred timeline? Well, once again, they don't really give us dates, which is a bummer. I really wish in the timeline book they'd given us firm dates, but that's okay. We can still look at the order of things. So we know that at some point she was imprisoned, and then, of course, she broke free, and then the Valkyries were slaughtered. Then is the Battle of Tonsberg. So it's before 965 CE is when she's imprisoned. Okay. And then is Wenwu. Oops. Remember, in this episode, Hela meets Wenwu. Oy vey. So this is definitely an example of where the writers of the series wanted certain characters to meet each other, and the timeline, the sacred timeline at least, did not lend itself to that, so they improvised. But the in-universe answer is, the name of this episode is, what if Wenwu was born 600 years earlier? That's the bottom line, because he would have to be born way earlier to be whenever time frame Hela normally would have been banished to hell, and instead now was banished to Earth. Oof, wild. Okay. So, one of the cool things we learn is that Hela's helmet is the source of her power, where she gets those blades that she throws. And without that, she loses it. And I say we learned it, but we kind of learned it, I guess, in season 1, because remember the Collector, when he put on Hela's helmet, he got her powers and the ability to form the blades. So maybe we should say they reinforced it. So that's kind of cool. We learn that the 10 rings came, quote, from beyond, because as the Watcher says, like the 10 rings that fueled his power, Wenwu knew all too well that the most powerful forces on Earth often come from beyond. Now, we kind of knew that it was from beyond. I mean, that's not a big surprise, but they're reinforcing it, and they're also reminding us about the 10 rings, because we haven't seen them since the Shang-Chi movie, and that was a good 2 years ago. So whenever Shang-Chi does reappear, they're using this to kind of remind us all about it. Then we have a reminder that the 10 rings are not of this realm, because Hela says that power, it's not of this realm. And so then we also learn that the 10 rings were a gift. Now, I don't want to take this too literally, but Wenwu says the 10 rings were a gift bestowed upon me. Now, he could mean that like, he considers it the gods gave it to him, that gave him a gift. Or it could be someone actually gave the rings physically to him. I'm really curious now to learn more about these rings. So I really like that this episode gave some hints at the lore behind them. Then we also learn that the 10 rings can legit destroy a god. Wow. Even Heimdall says there is one who is in possession of a great power, the 10 rings that could destroy a god. My word. So yeah, really want to know more. And Heimdall knew what these were. He knew what the 10 rings were. Very interesting. Now this is kind of cool. Talk about a big time lore here. So Hela mentions that my dad has a new girlfriend, Frigga. She's a dreadful woman, she says. Okay, so we learn a couple things about this. Number one, that means she's the half-sister to Thor. Wow, didn't know that. Makes sense, but didn't know that. But also, maybe Frigga is the one that convinced Odin to stop his conquest at the Nine Realms. Maybe when he started dating her, she's like, yo, chill, man. Let's stop with this. So very cool bits of lore. I'm really curious if the timeline book includes these when the next version comes out, but very, very cool stuff. Also, we learn that Ta Lo is beyond Heimdall's ability to see. I thought that was fascinating. He says, wherever Hela has gone, I can no longer see her. So does that mean that Heimdall was not able to see, other realms, other afterlives, the ancestral plane, the Nord dimension, etc.? Just very interesting. Where are these things located? They keep dropping little hints about these dimensions and realms, but I want to know more, Marvel. Tell us more. Where are they and how do they work? Then this was wild. What a huge reveal. Almost redeems Hela as a character because she was kind of the villain in Ragnarok, right? I mean, not kind of, really was the villain in Ragnarok. Well, we learned she'd been groomed from an early age to be a ruthless warrior. Basically, Odin's saying a king must tame his threats to ensure that they fight for him. So, man, I kind of feel bad for Hela. He raises her to be a warrior. Then when he suddenly meets Frigga and says, okay, let's stop now, Hela's like, this is all I've ever done. This is who you've made me to be. She couldn't just stop on a dime. So you really felt for Hela, and having her be redeemed in this episode as kind of Hela the White, that was pretty cool. Pretty cool. We also get a name for Odin's spear. Now, this is the name that's been used in Norse mythology before, but I don't believe anywhere in any of the MCU. And we learn that it's named Gungnir. Gungnir. I'm butchering it. You know what it means. Anyway, pretty cool that we get the name. And yeah, she does say that it's his spear. So get that away from him and he loses a lot of his power. Very cool. All right, so that's it for that episode. Now we move on to some very interesting multiversal reveals in the next 2 episodes. So, Season 2, Episode 8, the branch point is in 2018. It's when basically Steve Rogers, with his shield, hits one of the stones, and we know it's the Time Stone, right? And that creates basically a crunch between 2 different timelines, 2018 and 1602. And why do I say that? Well, because that's pretty much what they say in the episode, right? Captain Carter says, oh, really? Well, the way I figure it, the 2 time periods, the 1600s and the early 21st century, have been compressed. And if I don't find a way to unstick these time periods, this universe will shatter. So basically, 2 timelines, if you will, have been scrunched together into one universe. So that means in 1602, none of these heroes ever existed. Instead, they were basically spawned in when Steve Rogers hit that time stone. And Wanda reinforces this point. She says, a forerunner who has fallen through time, unaware that their presence is causing our universe to collapse. Now, I know a lot of people have been implying, well, this is some type of an incursion. I mean, I guess it's a time incursion, if you want to call it that, but it's not a standard incursion where two universes are crushing each other. It's two timelines are crushing each other. Peggy Carter says, I'm searching for a person, the forerunner, who would have been the first person transported to this world from the future. So we then see spawning into 1602 lots of random things. I mean, the Destroyer was obviously, well, destroyed by 2018, right? The Red Skull was off on Vormir. Loki was dead by this point in 2018, at least. He'd already been killed by Thanos. Hela was dead. She was killed back in 2017. So it was literally spawning people even from the past, even that had been dead, into this universe. Pretty crazy. And of course, somehow they even spawn the Freak, right? Happy Hogan, who in the Sacred Timeline obviously was never the Freak. So they were spawning them from all over the place. It's crazy. But this is my opinion, I guess. Leave it down in the comments if you don't agree. But we cannot mistake this as a standard incursion. This is a time rift. Notice that it's green. And what's really interesting is it tries to suck into it the people who really shouldn't be there. I mean, Hela gets sucked into it. Loki almost does. They both should have been dead in 2018. So it's almost like time was trying slowly to fix itself. Very interesting. But yeah, I do not consider this an incursion, which is important because I don't think what if branched universes can cause incursions with each other. So at first I was like, whoa, what's happening? And then I realized, no, this isn't really an incursion. It's an issue with time that's fixing itself. So I thought this was interesting. We have the Watcher realizing that Peggy can actually hear him. So there is something special going on. I don't know if she's just become more in tune to it, or is she like Deadpool and She-Hulk and others who, can sense things beyond what other characters in the MCU can sense. Very interesting. So she says, I can hear you, and he's like, wait, really? You can? Wild. So be very interested to see where they take this idea with Captain Carter. Is she a multiversal character beyond regular characters? Then let's really talk about this. So the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, used her powers to reach into a neighboring universe for a warrior. That is very interesting. They refer to it as a neighboring universe. Well, we know they're branches off 616. So the fact they're calling that a neighboring universe, to me, reinforces this idea that something like 838 is not a neighboring universe. It is separated because Wanda used her own powers to jump between universes. She created a portal, went to a different universe. Obviously, in Multiverse of Madness, she was not able to do that. In fact, she tried to kill America Chavez to steal her powers because she could not reach 838. So this is showing there is something fundamentally different about going between universes that are branched and universes that are alternate universes. Back to that diagram again. So I really think this reinforces the point that the branched universes are very, very different than alternate universes. In fact, it's kind of similar to me in how they talked about and referred to 616 adjacent realm. Everything is 616 related. So it's a neighboring universe to 616. It's an adjacent realm to 616. Their focus, Loki's tree, is 616 and its branch universes. This all ties in together so well. Plus, keep in mind, it wasn't just Wanda. Doctor Strange Strange Supreme did the same thing. He grabbed Peggy. He grabbed Kahori from different universes. So even if you say, well, in Multiverse of Madness, Wanda was so messed up and so frazzled, she didn't know how to use her magic to go over to 838. Well, neither did Doctor Strange. Remember, Doctor Strange was stuck in 838. He needed America Chavez to bring him back home. He could not return. He couldn't open a portal and return from 838 back to 616. Yet, here he is in What If, jumping between the universes. Because again, going between branched universes is very, very different than going between alternate universes. Major, major stuff. Wild. Just wild. All right, so then we go finally to Season 2, Episode 9. Now, I do really love the opening credits that get the what if treatment. We get even the lines from the comics. And there it is again. Happy, freak. Oh, I got Hulk blood pumping through me. But notice they call him the Freak yet again. And then, of course, now all the letters of Marvel get all the characters. So, yes, this is cool. It was fun to see visually, but I really think this was Marvel's way of going, what if matters? This show matters. We're actually putting it inside the Marvel logo because this show is important. So I think by the time we get season 3, it's really gonna get tied into the main universe. All right, so while this was only a subplot, it's still worth noting there was a branched universe. The story itself continues from earlier stories, but there is a branch point for the universe that Peggy goes to try to track down Kahari. And it's pretty cool because basically the bomb at Project Rebirth packed a bigger bang in this universe. So neither you nor Steve Rogers survived, which is interesting because this is the branch point in Peggy's original universe where she branched off. So here's another universe, June 1943, twice, where this has been a really important moment. The bomb either killed everybody, as it did in this universe, or made it so Steve Rogers couldn't accept the super soldier serum, and she did instead. So pretty cool. June of 1943 is a big deal in the multiverse. We learned the Watcher is a fifth-dimensional being. Come on, Peg, I know he's a fifth-dimensional being. That's pretty cool. Not fourth-dimensional, fifth-dimensional. That's how he's able to see all these different universes. Then Strange Supreme is gathering villains. This is fascinating. So he says, let me see here, Infinity Ultron, I think you know him, and then he goes through a bunch of these other villains. Well, what is he planning to do with them? Well, Kahori really drops a bomb here. He isn't just targeting universe killers, the villains, he's gathering righteous heroes too. Ignore her, shouts out Strange Supreme, and he says no. She says no. He's feeding them to the Forge. Strange isn't trying to save universes, he's trying to resurrect his universe. So think about that for a second. He is literally trying to create a universe by throwing in heroes and villains. Let that sit with you for a second if that doesn't sound like a familiar storyline. We'll come back to it in a second. So the World Forge is interesting because to me that looked like the multiversal core that we saw in Quantumania. Not exactly the same, but don't those spinning circles inside of each other? This looks kind of familiar. Then this was interesting because when Strange's demon comes out, notice it's got the third eye. And remember, that's what we saw on Doctor Strange at the end of Multiverse of Madness. So whenever there's a third eye, it's probably something bad's going to happen. This is really fascinating. When the Watcher takes Peggy into his realm, we see this. This wasn't the image we saw earlier. Remember I showed you when Ultron broke in. We didn't see this. Does anybody have any thoughts for what this is? Now, maybe this is him looking at the entire galaxy. Maybe this is a black hole, a white hole. I don't know. I'm really curious. I do not know for sure what to say this is. But it certainly was interesting. But here's the real key. So Doctor Strange was able to recreate a universe. Turned out he was never born into it, but he did recreate a universe. Is this how Secret Wars is going to go down? Not exactly the same. I don't mean Strange Supreme throwing people in a World Forge. But was this a hint of creating a new universe by grabbing heroes and villains from lots of other different universes? Interesting. See, I really think they used What If, this season of What If, to tease us with these ideas, get things in our head of possibilities, so that when it actually happens in the movies down the road, we're like, oh, that's it. I know this. And, at first, I will admit, in this episode, I was kind of bummed. It seemed like Strange Supreme regressed. Like, now he suddenly wants Christine back again, and he's willing to do whatever. But what a sad ending. If I thought that the first episode he was in from season 1 was sad, this is sad too. He recreated the universe, brought Christine back, and wasn't able to be there himself. What a sacrifice. So I thought this was a really good way to end Strange Supreme's storyline. But yeah, this Secret Wars tie, very, very interesting. And then, oh man, they dropped the bomb. I really thought this image wasn't going to be in the show. I thought this was just going to be that in the trailer. Anybody that saw the trailer knew they decorated it like a Christmas tree. But here's the Watcher observing Loki's tree. So I'm going to say again, I really think this is just 616 and its branches, because that's all the Watcher seems to be watching. He seems to be focused not on 838 and its branches or the Paint universe and its branches, etc. He is focused on 616 and its branches, down to the point where he tells you every time, in your universe, here's where something happened differently. So Does that mean there's a watcher for the 838 universe? Yeah, there probably is. Remember in Guardians of the Galaxy, we saw with Stan Lee's hilarious appearance, we saw multiple watchers all talking. I do think there's multiple watchers, and there's probably one for each multiverse. So, yeah, I am so convinced now that Loki's tree is just 616 and its branches. So let me know what you think. Did this convince you, or are you still not convinced? And then one last thing, I'm just going to kind of summarize all the branch points here because it's just kind of cool to see. Over on the left is the first season. The only thing I'll point out that's interesting is the third episode with Nick Fury there. The reason it's 2009 is even the timeline book said it's not 2010 because it looked like it was during Fury's big week that the branch happened. It was actually when Hope died. So they are realizing that sometimes the branch is happening prior to what we're seeing in the episode. So that's why that's 2009. But over on the right, you can see everything for season 2. And then there's a couple episodes where there wasn't really a new branch, right? It was just a continued episode. So very cool. I really enjoyed this season, probably even more than the first season, and I am so stoked for season 3. Let me know what you think. Are you excited for another season of What If? So don't forget, we do have the December contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You might win a book or a steel book. And of course, we have the membership option. And last but not least, I always like to mention the Discord server, and in particular, What If has been a really popular topic on the Discord server. And remember, we did the What If contest, and I did a video on that, the results of that. Well, we're doing another one because it was so much fun. So if you're looking for a reason to finally join the Discord server, let this be your reason. Join, and you can share your What If pitches. We'll be voting on both a fully fleshed out story, a couple paragraphs, but also even just on one sentence pitches of a title. So it should be a lot of fun. Love to have you join the Discord server. I will leave a pinned comment so you know how to join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.